So with that, I'll ask Benji to start our recording. And welcome everyone to the 71st episode of MOS, Minnesota Outdoor Skills and Stewardship Series. Today is the 2022 new deer hunting regulations, and I'm pleased to introduce our two guests today, Barb Keller, our Big Game Program Leader, and Todd Froberg, our Big Game Program Coordinator. If you have any questions, make sure you put them in the Q&A. And with that, Barb, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and you can get into your program.
Great, thank you, Craig. Is my PowerPoint showing correctly?
Everything looks good here, Barb.
Great. Well, welcome everyone. I'm Barb Keller. I'm the Big Game Program Leader with Minnesota DNR, and I'm joined today with Todd Froberg, Big Game Program Coordinator. So we oversee deer, elk, and moose management for the state, and we're happy and excited today to roll out our 2022 deer season and talk about some of the changes hunters and other folks should be aware of. So first, I'm going to go over briefly deer management in our state. Specifically, I'm going to talk about deer population goals and how they're used. And then I'll get into our 2022 deer season dates and bag limits and other regulation changes that hunters should be aware of. And then I'm going to hand it over to Todd, and he's going to cover chronic wasting disease in our Minnesota deer population, and specifically some CWD related regulation changes hunters should be aware of. And then we'll talk or wrap up with some resources for the public where you can find out more information and some helpful links that you should be aware of. All right. So if you've taken time out of your day to listen to me talk about deer, I probably don't have to work too hard to convince you that deer are important, but I do always like to put in a plug about how much deer are important to our state. So obviously, deer are important and have intrinsic value as a wildlife species on their own, but they're also what we consider a keystone species, which means that deer can have a significant impact on the landscape and ecosystems where they're present. And that means that if deer were to disappear from the landscape, we would lose those benefits that deer provide. So deer can increase diversity in an area where they're present. They also provide food and sustenance for other animal species, but we also know that when deer become overabundant in an area, they can unfortunately have a negative impact on the environment. And so that's why it's important for us to keep deer numbers in balance with the available habitat. And that's also why deer hunting is so important to our state. Deer hunting is the main tool that we use to manage the deer population. In certain areas of the state, we have great deer habitat, and deer can be very productive. They do have a high reproductive potential. Most does can become pregnant in a year, and twinning can be very frequent in deer populations, and sometimes triplets can actually occur as well. And so in the areas of our state where we do have abundant deer habitat, deer populations can grow pretty quickly. So again, hunting is the main tool that we use to manage those populations. And some areas of our state, we no longer have the predator populations that we once did. Hunting also, it can be very important to our economy. It adds 465 million estimated to our economy each year, and it can be especially important to rural economies. It also provides a very healthy and low-cost source of protein for many in our state, and many hunters really value the tradition that hunting provides, and many hunters consider hunting to be part of their identity. So the way that we manage deer throughout our state is based on, or we break our state up into 130 blocks of land called deer permit areas, and the map here on the right shows all of those deer permit areas throughout our state. And these are broken up into areas of similar habitat, deer populations, land use, and other factors. And the way that we manage deer populations within these deer permit areas is by setting a deer population goal. A deer population goal is articulated as the desired direction and magnitude of change over the next few years. So for example, we might set a goal to increase the deer population in a certain area by a certain percentage point, or we may if the deer population in a permit area seems appropriate and people are pleased with, then we would want to keep that deer population stable, so stay the same. Or we may have a deer population goal to decrease the deer population by a certain percentage point. And this guides the deer management in these areas over the next 5 to 10 years. So that map that you see on the right, we are undertaking the process of revising deer population goals throughout the state. We started this in 2020, and we first visited the blue areas of the state, and then we moved to the purple. We are in the green this past winter, and then this upcoming winter, 2023, will be in those yellow portions of that map. This guides the annual decision-making process about, for the most part, bag limits that we set in the state. And so the way that we use those is each year we will assess where we think the deer population is in a permit area relative to that goal that we set. And the way that we assess that is we have a population model that we use that estimates the deer population size. We also just use raw harvest data, which can give us a pretty good indication of deer population trends in an area. We also use public input, so information that we get from you, the public. We have several opportunities for the public to provide input throughout the year. There's one coming up that I'm going to talk about at the end of this talk. We have a deer open house that's coming up in August. And we also do some more formal public input through the use of mail surveys. So that plays a role in understanding where deer populations are. Have they grown? Have they decreased? Area staff as well, our local wildlife staff, they're out in the field and they're observing deer and deer habitat. They're also talking to the public. So they're hearing what the public has to say about deer populations, and that informs where we think deer populations are at relative to that goal. And then in some areas of the state, obviously northern Minnesota, winter can play a large role in deer populations. And so if we've had a particular severe winter, we might then determine deer populations might be going down in that area. So that's also used in our assessment of where deer populations are. And so again, we use that information to decide what the regulations should be in these permit areas in order to move the deer population towards the goal, generally through the number of antlerless permits that we provide. So if we had a deer population that was over the goal, we would be offering more opportunities and more antlerless permits in order to move the deer population towards the goal. Likewise, if we are under goal, we would be reducing the number of antlerless permits that would be available in that area in order to help the deer population grow. So deer population goals themselves, the factors that we take into account when we're setting those, again, public input, as I mentioned, is pretty important in that. And we do have a formal process that we collect input through randomized mail surveys that go out to hunters and landowners in all of these areas. So I think it was this past winter, we actually sent mail surveys to those hunters and landowners in the yellow area to get to gain their opinion on where they think deer populations are and where they think they should go. And it provides us a scientifically valid snapshot of public opinion in these areas. But also through informal calls, emails, and engagement with local staff, that also factors into our assessment of the population goal. And then we will also, through the public goal setting process, or the deer population goal setting process, we'll have a comment period when we've developed the draft goals. We'll then go back out to the public and say, this is what we think the deer population goal should be in these areas. What do you think? And we gain public input from that process as well. We also, other than public input, use harvest trends and other biological data to assess deer populations in these areas to determine if they're healthy and where they are at relative to their habitat or the carrying capacity. Winter severity and predator populations play a role, and deer damage complaints as well. And then habitat considerations. So is there enough habitat in the area to support an increase in deer population, or are deer having a negative impact on deer habitat or habitat in general? All of those factors are considered when we set those deer population goals. All right, I'll be talking in a little bit later. I'll show you, as I mentioned, we're in the green areas of the state this year, and we've finalized those deer population goals. I'll show you what those population goals ended up being here just a little bit later in the presentation. Now I'm going to move on to deer season 2022. So these are the dates for 2022 deer season. We have numerous opportunities for hunters to participate. It starts with our archery deer season, which begins in the middle of September. Then our firearms deer seasons, these are the most popular deer season, begin November 5th. Now, we often get questions about why these dates tend to bump around a little bit. They are set in the rule So for example, firearms deer season will always open on the Saturday closest to November 6th. And so that's why that just for calendar creep, they'll move around a little bit. But we aren't making major changes to the deer season dates from year to year. So firearms deer season, you can see that there are different season lengths and dates for different areas of the state. We have the longer deer season in the 100 series permit areas, and then a shorter deer season in the 200 series permit areas. Our 300 deer series is broken up. It's a split season, and hunters need to decide whether they want to participate in the A season, which is November 5th to the 13th, or the B season, which is November 19th to the 27th. They can't participate in both unless they're in a 600 series deer permit area, which is our disease management permit areas. There, hunters don't need to decide. They can participate in both, and they can use either the A or the B season license to participate. Our metro deer season is also our lengthiest firearm season, November 5th to the 27th in the metro area. Then we also have opportunities earlier in the season for youth. Our youth deer season is statewide, and it's October 20th to the 23rd. That falls over MEA weekend. We made that change, I believe it was 2019, that we went statewide with our youth deer season. And then our early antlerless season, this is not a statewide season. It is only open in select deer permit areas, and I'm going to show you where it's open here in a few minutes. But that also coincides with the youth season dates over MEA weekend, October 20th to the 23rd. And our late CWD hunt, Todd's going to be talking a little bit more about that. He'll cover CWD, but you can see that is only open in some select deer permit areas, our 600 series deer permit areas. Also, I do just want to cover, I know there's probably been some confusion and questions about the rifle zone, the shotgun rifle zone boundary. The legislature did talk about that this year, and they were considering making some changes to that, but nothing was passed. So no changes to the shotgun rifle zone boundary this year. All right, here are bag limits for the state. So that's the map here on the left is showing the number of deer that you can take in each deer permit area throughout the state. And you can see that we start off there on that legend with the most conservative bucks only bag limit designation, and as you go down, it becomes more liberal, with our highest bag limit being the 5 deer limit. So across the state, you can see many areas of the state, we are allowing hunters to take 2 or more deer. So those pink and green and purple areas are showing that. And this reflects deer populations that are faring pretty well throughout much of the state. That's kind of diagonal swap, kind of reflects where we have the highest deer populations. In southwestern Minnesota, we have lower deer population numbers, but they've generally been stable. And then in northeastern Minnesota and north central Minnesota, deer populations here have been lower. They're quite a bit lower than they have been in the past. And unfortunately, these deer went through a fairly rough winter this past winter. And so this is where you'll see the most conservative bag limits in the state, in reflecting that deer populations are low and they just went through a tough winter. But overall, the bag limit map looks pretty similar to what it was last year. 90 deer permit areas, the bag limits didn't change from last year. But in 28 of the deer permit areas, we did increase the bag limit or antlerless lottery permits. And in 12 deer permit areas, we did decrease the bag limit or lottery permits. And that table there that's below shows for those blue parts of that map, those are antlerless permit lottery, and we're just showing the number of permits that are available for hunters in those areas. If you do hunt in one of the blue areas and you want an opportunity to harvest an antlerless deer this year, make sure that you get your license by September 8th. That's the deadline, so that you can be enrolled in that lottery. All right, I want to talk about early antlerless season because we have made some changes to that this year. Again, as I mentioned, that's October 20th to 23rd. It coincides with our youth deer season, but it's not statewide. It's only open in certain deer permit areas. And this map here shows you the deer permit areas where it is open. So those gray areas are where we have the early antlerless season this year. It's in 28 deer permit areas, which is 8 more than last year. We did make a change to the bag limit. It was 5 deer. We've taken it down to 3 deer. And we're not anticipating that will actually have much effect on harvest at all. 99% of successful hunters during the early antlerless season are taking 3 deer or less. So not anticipating that's going to have a huge change. Keep in mind those harvested deer do not count towards the statewide or the permit area bag limit. So if you're hunting in an area that's a 3 deer bag limit, you can take 3 deer during the early antlerless season and then still participate in the firearms deer season and take 3 additional deer. Chose to do so. So another change that we've made is that we've eliminated the requirement that you have to obtain an early antlerless permit to participate in this season. There tends to be a lot of confusion around the early antlerless season. We're trying to eliminate barriers for participation and make it easier for hunters to participate. So this is what you need if you want to hunt in one of these areas that's open during the early antlerless season. You need to purchase your parent deer hunting license, and it must match the weapon type that you plan to use during that season. So for example, if you want to use a firearm, you need to get your firearms deer hunting license, and so forth. For if you want to use archery equipment, you just need the archery license, muzzleloader deer hunting license. So if you just want to take 1 deer all season long and you want it to be an antlerless deer, you can just get your parent hunting license, and then you can go participate in the early antlerless season, and you can tag your antlerless deer with that parent deer hunting license. Most hunters want to save that parent license because they want to use it.
Got my cordless. How does that work?
Tag an antlered buck.
What's the cutoff date for crossbow?
So if you want to use your license to tag an antlered buck, do not use it to tag an antlerless deer during early antlerless season.
Yeah, I got a question on it.
Then you can get one of the permits that we have available. So we have 3 different permits that you use during the early antlerless season. The early antlerless permit is an option. It's a low-cost option to fill the bag limit. It's $8.50. The trade-off with the early antlerless permit is that if you decided to use that and you weren't successful and you didn't use it to fill the bag limit, it can't be used during other seasons. So you can't use it during the firearms deer season that comes up in November. On the other hand, the bonus permit's higher cost, $18. That option is there, and if you don't use it to fill the bag limit during the early antlerless season, you can use it to to tag antlerless deer during later seasons. And then if you hunt one of our 600 series deer permit areas, you could use disease management permits. Those are low cost, $2.50 permits. They can only be used in the 600 series areas, and they could be used if you did not fill them during other seasons. So hopefully this will alleviate some barriers and make it a little bit easier for people to participate in the early antlerless season. Another change I wanted to make people aware of: if they participate in one of our special deer hunts on state parks or on the scientific and natural areas where we allow deer hunting, there is now a requirement that you use non-toxic ammunition. So no lead ammunition if you hunt in a special deer hunt on a state park or on a scientific and natural area. This came from a petition that was received by the DNR in 2021 from some conservation groups who petitioned to ban the use of lead shot and lead fishing tackle on SNAs in state parks. The commissioner decided that such a broad ban on lead shot and fishing tackle needed to be tackled by the legislature, that it wasn't appropriate for them to do that in rule. And so, but they did determine that it was appropriate to ban the use during the special deer hunts that occur on the scientific and natural areas and state parks. So the letter of decision is available there on the webpage if you'd like to check that out as well. But hunters need to be aware of this. We're always encouraging hunters to make a plan and be aware of the regulation changes where they are. But particularly in this case, as we know, there's been an ammunition shortage the past few years, and sometimes this type of ammunition can be difficult to obtain. So we want to make sure hunters are well aware of that ahead of time and can plan and obtain the appropriate ammunition to comply with that. All right, now I'm just gonna, as I mentioned, I would touch on what our deer population goals are in those areas that we've recently updated them. So that's the green areas there on that map, and then flip to what our population goals are for these areas. So these were just updated this past winter. So for the most part, we are stabilizing deer populations or increasing them in many of these areas, with the one exception in the southeast part of the state, which is the Blufflands Plateau area. We are recommending slight decreases in deer populations in those areas, in those permit areas where we have the highest disease concern, which is chronic wasting disease, which Todd will be talking about here in a moment. But those other areas of the state in the Arrowhead, recommending stable deer populations. This is our primary moose range, and moose are the big game management priority in that area. And then in the North Central and Pine Moraine school blocks, we're recommending stable or increasing deer populations in this area. This information is available on our website, where you can learn more about the deer population goal setting process. As I mentioned, we'll be in that yellow area of that map that I showed this upcoming winter, and there will be opportunities for the public to provide input on population goals this winter for that area. These goals did go into effect this year, and they were used to set the bag limits for these areas this fall. So with that, I think that covered my portion of today, and we're going to hand it over to Todd Froberg, and he's going to talk about chronic wasting disease.
Hi, everybody. I'm Todd. I'm the Big Game Program Coordinator, as Barb mentioned earlier, and I'll be talking a little bit about CWD and kind of what's different this year. And there's some changes, bigger changes, and then some things that have stayed the same. But just a quick overview of CWD. It's a chronic wasting disease. Is a degenerative neurological disease affecting the cervid family. So your deer species, elk, moose, reindeer, and caribou. It belongs to a group of diseases known as TSEs. So the long format of that is transmissible spongiform encephalopathy. And that basically translates to transmissible, so transferred animal to animal spongiform, just like it sounds. The prions create vacuoles in the brain and create essentially a spongy brain, and then encephalopathy relating to the brain. So they're caused by prions, as I said, and those are abnormal proteins that self-replicate and they do not degrade like normal healthy prions do and go away. So they're extremely problematic in that they're highly resistant to disinfectants, heat, and or freezing. And also there is no vaccine or treatments for TSEs, and they are always fatal. The CDC recommends not eating known positives. I would say with any animal or any disease, if you have a known positive or a known sick animal, I would not eat it anyway. So to me, this makes perfect sense, even though it has never been documented in humans. Barb, you can go to the next slide. So the CWD distribution in North America, it started in Colorado. You can see there in the central part of the map, and unfortunately has expanded drastically throughout North America and beyond. It is currently in 30 US states, 4 Canadian provinces, and Norway and South Korea, obviously much aided by anthropogenic movements and not natural movements. And unfortunately now in Minnesota, we have it in 8 distinct areas. Still most cases coming from southeastern Minnesota and Fillmore and Winona County. So DPA is 646, 647, and 648 mostly. But as said, it is expanding, and we have found it in a few new areas this year. Next slide. So some things to know for this upcoming hunting season. One change specifically related to the management zones. It's similar to last year in that there's mandatory sampling on opening weekends, but this year it's only opening weekend, November 5th and 6th. And it'll be a combination of hybrid staffed and self-service stations. And there's a list that is available online. If you want to go to a staff station, you'll be able to choose that. Or if you are confident in taking that lymph node and would just rather avoid that, you can use those self-service sampling stations. Outside of firearms opening weekend, it'll be voluntary sampling for the rest of the seasons, and a bit of a departure based on the need to kind of create the best atmosphere for hunter service testing, and also obtaining enough samples for our disease surveillance frameworks, and then also balancing the costs of CWD sampling. It'll be voluntary for the rest of those seasons, but there will still be self-service stations open during the firearm season only. A couple of new zone changes. Next slide. So DPA 679 previously 179 is now a 600 series, so it's a management zone, CWD zone. That is due to a detection of a wild deer in the city limits of Grand Rapids. That was a car-killed deer that was reported by a citizen that lives in Grand Rapids. Agency did some more culling after that detection and did find another wild deer right in that near vicinity. I believe the culling took place within 2 miles of that positive. So one more positive, so that created that zone. Next slide. And then this other area near in northwestern Minnesota, so near climax, the positive deer was submitted by a hunter who did it on his own. He paid for the sampling and sent it to Colorado State University, the same laboratory where our samples go to. He paid for everything himself. He just took it upon himself. He wanted to have peace of mind and know whether his deer was CWD positive, but unfortunately it did detect positive for CWD. So this created this new CWD management zone in the surrounding surveillance zone. So as I said, those will be mandatory on opening weekends with the exception of this surveillance zone, 256, 257, 265, and then 262. That will be a point-based surveillance, as will that West Central Zone 213 and 273. Next slide. Some more things to know. As I mentioned, kind of balancing the need for wanting to engage hunters, giving hunters peace of mind, and that just hunter the self-service. We are operating a statewide mail-in kit program this year that's new. So you can request a kit, and there's instructions in the kit. You got everything you need: gloves, baggies to submit your sample, and then you mail it in, and then we mail the sample from there. All you have to do, there's on the CWD website, you just request your kit and it sends within 7 days. So I just make a plug if you're planning to do it that way for any of the seasons, whether it's archery, MEA weekend for the early antlerless season or the youth season, or of course on opening weekend to request those kits early so you get those in time. And then we also are trying to expand our partner sampling program. So in the past, it's been with partnering taxidermists and some meat processing facilities. We are trying to expand that to more areas of the state to make it easier for hunters to find taxidermists or meat processors in that area. There's also a few sports shops. So I know Coyote Creek in particular in Rochester. So archery shops is like one. So those new, I guess, sports shops. And then again, late CWD hunts, a departure from last year where it was 2 weekends. This year it's only 1 weekend, and it's a 3-day weekend, December 16th to the 18th. And it's in the Southeast 600 series and 605 only. But if we have more detections, there could potentially be more DPAs added to this, but currently that's how we have it slated right now. Next slide. I did mention this one earlier. This is on a weight-based or a risk-based surveillance points. So this is a voluntary, but you are available to have those mail-in kits. It's mainly partner sampling through taxidermists, meat processors, and there's a few people that take samples themselves and send them in. This will be the 3rd year of surveillance in 2002, so fingers crossed. We'll be absolving this surveillance zone next year. And this was created due to a CWD positive at a Douglas County farm, but it's considered pretty low risk. There was only 2 animals on that facility. A buck and a doe. One tested positive, the other did not, and there's not very good deer habitat. It was kind of in the middle of a field, so not good deer habitat around there. So hopefully potential is pretty low for any more wild positives there. Next slide. A few minor changes to the East Central Surveillance Zone. This one was also created from the same trace out. This was a trace out in Pine County that resulted in the Douglas County farm, but this one's a little bit higher risk. There was more animals on this, more tested positive, and there was decent deer habitat surrounding the facility. Again, this will be the 3rd year of surveillance. We have not detected any more wild positives. And we dropped the eastern part of Carlos Avery in the northern portion of 236 from the surveillance zone to kind of zone in and keep it within 15 miles from the farm. Those areas were outside of that 15-mile buffer that we'd like to surveil. So next slide. In part of our new area, the North Central Management Surveillance Zone, there's 3 areas here. On the second year, the Beltrami County Farm and dump site, there was no detections in wild deer last year, but we will keep on for the 3-year period of surveillance. One of the new areas, as mentioned, 679, that positive in the Grand Rapids, creates this 679. And unfortunately, at the end of last year in 604, there was another positive detection in wild deer that incurs continued surveillance for 604. So it's a management zone. And just a note for 679, we typically do the DPAs around that would create a management or surveillance zone, but we are trying to do a more nuanced approach to this and not create that bigger area. Just in this area specifically due to some lower deer density, severe winters, and some just basic differences in deer populations based on kind of like differences opposed to southeastern Minnesota, where we have very high deer densities and more risk. Next slide. And then the southeast and south metro area, if you are hunting in this area, you're probably pretty familiar with it. In southeastern Minnesota, we've had disease testing since 2016. And then South Metro, we're going on a few years of surveillance there as well. So again, mandatory surveillance on opening weekend of firearms. No longer during the bee season for the 300 series will there be mandatory surveillance, so just and then dropping that surveillance in the surrounding South Metro permit areas. We have not found any more detections in those areas, so dropping that for now. And we have been meeting sample goals in these areas. And with these, I guess, yellow areas, there is carcass movement restrictions. So from the light yellow, you can move it into the dark yellow, but you cannot move from a higher risk to a lower risk. So those light yellow areas, you can't move outside of it, and the dark yellow areas, you can't move into the light yellow areas. Next slide. And then again, where this hunter turned in a sample, created the 661 area. It used to be 261. Now it's a management zone, so mandatory surveillance opening weekend in 661, and there is a carcass movement restriction. In the surrounding areas where that's surveillance and weight based, it is not a carcass movement restriction. So. And this one is also a tricky area. It's pretty low density, and we don't get a lot of samples just based on the amount of harvest there is. It's pretty low harvest in this area, so we really need to generate some more data to, I guess, make informed decisions, and that's why it's not a bigger zone. It's a pretty migratory population based on where the habitat is. The habitat is more centered on the river corridor, and then to the east of this of where the positive was. And there maybe isn't a great idea of exactly where this deer came from. It was an adult male, closer to the rut, so it potentially could have been moving. So hoping to get some more data and more information on what's happening in this area. And just a note, in North Dakota, they will be doing some increased sampling, but their zones are really big. So it'll be difficult to tell, but hopefully we get some samples on the other side of the border as well. So next slide. So that was pretty quick. Both Barb and I are here to take any questions, and then just a plug, since I did not mention this, there will be CWD public meetings in those new areas. So in the northwestern Minnesota, in that climax area, in Crookston, Minnesota, and then in the Grand Rapids area. Those details will be coming out shortly in the news release. And those are slated to be August 23rd and 24th, Barb? Yep. So more details to come are forthcoming on those.
All right, thanks, Todd. I did just want to highlight some of these resources that we have available for folks. Our hunting and trapping regs booklet is live, it's out, but you probably won't find the paper copy yet. It's going to be a couple weeks. I think they are maybe shipping out August 8th, I want to say. So it's going to be a couple weeks before those hit our vendors, but you can find the online version here. We are always encouraging hunters to make a plan. And so as Todd has gone through all of these changes that are affecting new areas, and we have different things in place in different areas, really encouraging folks just to go to this Make a Plan website, select your deer permit area that you plan to hunt, and it'll have all the details there about what you need to know and how you need to be prepared for this hunting season. We also have this great deer permit area interactive map available, and this is great for hunters to check out all of the deer permit areas in the state, and you can click on a deer permit area. It'll give you a report, a little summary that our local area staff wrote up about the deer population in that area and about the habitat. And then you can look at past hunting statistics in that area, the winter severity index in that area, and a whole wealth of other information available there, as well as it will highlight if there's any CWD related regulations in effect. So that's a great tool. Our CWD website has a wealth of information about chronic wasting disease. And if you want to get your deer sampled, this is how you do it. And you can also go there if you'd like to request one of those mail-in kits that Todd talked about. You can go to that website. You should be able to get and request a kit through there. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we have an upcoming public input opportunity, August 25th. We will have one of our deer open houses. And this is an opportunity for everyone to talk to their local area wildlife staff about deer populations. As I mentioned, we use public input. It informs our deer regulations each year. And this is a good opportunity to connect with your local area wildlife manager and talk about deer and how you feel about the deer population in your area. If you think there should be any changes made, it's a great time to do that. So we have those opportunities in August, and we also have that opportunity typically February, March again. And that really leads into our season setting process for when we start the whole regulations development as well. So encourage folks to use both of those opportunities. We'll have other public input opportunities also available after deer season. We generally have an online deer survey that we put out, just another opportunity to provide input. So I think that's all, Craig and Ben, that we had to share today. And I think we have time to maybe answer a few questions.
Okay, good job. If you want to, did you have a slide with your contact info on it at the very end, or?
I forgot to add my contact info. I'm going to try to maybe put it in the chat.
Okay. So if you want to go ahead and close down your presentation, we can get the Q&A started. We've got a few questions coming in. Please remember to use the Q&A section. We had one come into the chat, and I was trying to find the information. So I'm going to cover that one right away. The gentleman says, I'm 62 years old. Can I use a crossbow, and what restrictions are there for crossbow? Also, if I got archery and firearms license in zone 172, it shows 1 deer limit. If I harvest one during the archery season, am I done? Or can I harvest one during the firearms season? So let's dive into that first part. The age 60 and over can use a crossbow in Minnesota without getting a special permit from enforcement. So if you're 62, you should be good to go there. And then if you're in a 1 deer limit, whether you shoot it with your bow or your rifle, you are done in that deer permit area, but you can travel to a deer permit area that has other deer tags available. So it might be a bonus tag, it might be a disease management tag, or some other type. Barb, do you have any comment on that?
Yeah, if you're in a lottery permit area, if you harvest a deer and you want to move to a different area to harvest a deer, it needs to be a higher bag limit designation to move to a different area. But yeah, otherwise, that's correct.
Okay. So we've got a few questions in here, so we'll start, and usually leads to more questions, but Susan wants to know if you will be only hunting in a management CWD area, do you need to purchase the $34 license first and then subsequent license like the disease management license that are $2.50? Or can you just hunt on a disease management tag for?
Yep, that's correct. You will need to purchase your parent license, so your $34 license, and then you can buy the disease management tags at $2.50. With the exception being the CWD late hunts, you are able to purchase and use a disease management tag without purchasing your parent license first, but only during that 3-day hunt.
Okay. Keith wants to know, so no lead composition bullets in SNAs. What about muzzleloader bullets? There'll be copper bullets there too?
Yes, all ammunition needs to be non-toxic lead-free ammunition. There's more information available in our regs book with details on that. And I will say that is true for most SNAs that allow deer hunting, but I think there's just a few exceptions. So be sure to check out the actual regulations for that specific scientific and natural area you intend to hunt on. It is true for all special deer hunts on state parks, but just a few SNAs it won't apply to, and I think those are the peatland associated SNAs.
And we are going to have a episode August 31st on bullet construction, so you might want to tune into that one to learn a little bit more about options. Dennis wants to know self-service versus mandatory. Will the self-service station count as a mandatory sample?
Yeah, sorry, and I maybe wasn't all the way clear on that. Yes, that is correct. So self-service versus mandatory. So mandatory sampling, if you harvest a deer during opening weekend, November 5th or 6th, you have to harvest your deer. And self-service just means that those stations on opening weekend won't be staffed. There'll still be a station there, but it'll be in the past as maybe some people have used head boxes, as the long version, self-service sampling stations. So there's instructions there, tags to fill out. You submit your deer head or the lymph nodes, and then fill out the data corresponding that, your license and name, and then location of harvest. But yes, those self-service sampling stations do fulfill the requirement of mandatory sampling, as does if you were to request a mail-in kit, so long as that you have it postmarked within 72 hours of harvest. You will get a receipt saying that you did that. So that does fulfill the requirement of mandatory testing. So basically, as long as you get your deer tested when it's mandatory testing, that requirement is fulfilled, whether it's staffed, self-service, or mail-in, or partner.
Good. Bill has a question on deer attractants. Why is there an attractant feeding ban in Clearwater County where there's no CWD has been found, but no ban in Beltrami where CWD has been found?
So our CWD response plan outlines where and why we apply the deer feeding and attractant bans. So when we find it in a wild deer, we will add that county where the deer was located, as well as all surrounding counties, to a deer feeding and attractant ban. When we find it, when it is found in a farmed deer facility, we add that county and all surrounding counties to a deer feeding ban. That attractant ban does not apply to the farmed positive situation. So in Clearwater County, there's a deer feeding and attractant ban, because Todd might be able to help me, but one of the counties that border Clearwater County, there was a positive wild deer that was found. It's a riskier situation. We know it's already in the wild. We want to take as much as we can take risks that we add to the disease situation off the table as we can. We want to do that. In the farm situation, we know there's some risk there, but we don't know that it's in the wild deer population yet. So it's a slightly less riskier situation. We do want to take, that deer feeding risk off the table, but not yet implement an attractant ban unless we find it in the wild deer population.
Okay. Mark has a question, maybe a clarification on, do general public lands areas count as SNA lands like Seven Springs? And I'm not familiar with Seven Springs, but maybe you can explain.
I'm not familiar with Seven Springs either, but if it doesn't have the title scientific and natural area, it's not an SNA. This is not just general public lands. It's not WMAs or wildlife management areas. These are very specific lands that are designated as scientific and natural areas. So if you just, I don't know what Seven Springs is, but if you just Googled it, if it doesn't have SNA in the title, it's not an SNA.
Okay. And this is a great question, because I've never hunted before. So is there training available or for newbies, group hunting programs? And we are going to be announcing here very, very soon our Learn to Deer Hunt program. We have 3 different site locations around the state. We will meet and teach you about equipment, deer and deer biology, and actually take you out in the field and show you what deer sign looks like on the ground and why you'd put your stand on this side of the tree versus the other side of the tree, and then take you on a 1.5-day hunt in one of those 3 areas. You can reach out to me, Benji, if you can put my contact in the chat, and we can get you an application for that. Basically, you need to provide warm clothes, a blaze orange vest, and a hat, and we take care of everything else. And you buy your deer license, and you can go out and learn to hunt with us. It's been a very popular program over the years, and we've finally got past the pandemic enough where we can get together for some of this. There's also Learn to Deer Hunt series that we did during the pandemic. It's all video. You can go and watch all of those and get an idea from James Burnham and myself on the equipment and the processes that you would go through. So check those out. So that was the last question we've got. And
Craig, I'm sorry to interrupt. I'd just like to go back to that question that Mark had about well, specifically Seven Springs. So Seven Springs is a WMA, so a wildlife management area versus a SNA. So these things have different designations based on, I guess, what their intention is or what their land acquisition was based on. So a lot of the times the SNAs have a specialized reason or a specific species of concern, and that's why it's conserved. So and wildlife management areas are generally for wildlife designated, and those do not have ammo restrictions on them. So that just is very broadly, but there's also on the SNAs that are included in those, or the state park hunts that are included in the ammo restrictions. There's a specific list that you can see on the website.
Mm-hmm. And for all of our Learn to Hunt, we use non-toxic ammo, and we'll train with lead core ammo because we go to a rifle range and the bullets go into a dirt bank where they can be recycled out, and then we recite in with copper and do the hunt. We're going to talk ammo availability and that kind of stuff in the August 31st presentation too. So we've got just a few more minutes here. If anybody's got another question, that would be the time to get it in. While we're waiting for questions, let's talk about next week, Episode 72 is going to be Hunters as Citizen Scientists with Nicole Davros, and Jeff Letterman will be our DNR host for that day, so make sure you tune into that. Guys, I want to thank you both for being here today and sharing your knowledge on this topic. It feels like fall up in northern Minnesota. We're getting cooler nights. We're starting to see a little more deer movement around. I think deer flies are having some of that pushing them around, but it's getting to be that time of year, and we'll our programming will kind of reflect that over the next session of getting out in the field and enjoying the resources that we have. So I don't see any more questions coming in. Thank you everyone for tuning in and being with us today. This will be up on the website probably on Monday by the time we get it all closed captioned. So you can tune back in and check that out. With that, Benji, if you'd take us back to the green room, that would be wonderful. And thanks for tuning in, everyone.
I had one more question that just popped into the chat here, Craig.
Okay,
So
go ahead.
Glenn was asking, his farm is a game refuge, designated as a game refuge. Who would he contact to change that designation? Does anybody know?
So his farm was designated as a game refuge. I'm not super familiar with private property being designated as a game refuge. I do know that some of those game refuges exist on WMAs or other public land, but I think probably it would be, I don't know, Todd, you can help me out if you're aware, but I would probably start with the local wildlife area manager, which you can find that information on that Deer Open House link that was put in there, and probably start with them. And if you want to, you can also try my email if you want to explain a little bit more about your situation. I might be able to point you in a little bit more specific direction that might help out. Do you have anything, Todd, to add on?
Yeah, unfortunately, that's kind of something outside my realm. So yeah, maybe shoot us an email and we can point you in the right direction or try to get you some help on that specifically.
Great. So Glenn, if you're still on there, scroll up in the chat a little bit and you'll see both Todd and Barb's email. You can go from there. And Mark also put a question there about a list of taxidermies that are associated with the CWD sampling available. And I believe that is on the CWD site, which is also linked a little higher up in the chat. So is that correct, Barb?
Todd might know more specifically, but I will say, if you're planning to use one of the partners, I would check a little bit later on, and because I know they're actively recruiting and adding taxidermists to that list. So I don't know if they have the list up yet. And even if they do have the list up, they're probably going to be adding people to it. So you might have more options if you wait and check out a little bit more closer to when you go out deer hunting. We want you to obviously be prepared and have a plan, but I think they're still actively adding people to that list.
Yeah, correct. That solicitation just went out within the last couple of weeks, so there's still some taxidermists. A lot of returning participating taxidermists, but also the increased effort to get new taxidermists on board. So those are kind of filtering in day to day. So yeah, definitely the website is the most up to date on information of who is participating and who isn't. So.
Great. Thank you for your help with that. And hopefully if anybody has any other questions, they can reach out to us and we'll do the best we can to answer those. So thanks everybody and have a good afternoon.
Take care, guys. See you next week.